my fight fans? So, we have this great debate going on. Still, as a matter of fact, we got who is the greatest welterweight of all time. And prior to this fight that just took place on Saturday, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman, prior to his loss, everybody and their mother in the MMA community was pretty much saying that Kamaru Usman was the greatest welterweight ever. And we all know who they're trying to refer to. We all know who they are trying to say that he is better than, and that is George St. Pierre. Well, after this loss, and to be honest with you, me personally, even before this loss, I still would have always truly would have said George St. Pierre was the greatest of all time. Not just in the welterweight division, but just as an MMA fighter in general. But specifically in the welterweight division, there is just hands down, regardless, 100% George St. Pierre is the greatest welterweight ever in the UFC. And here is why. We got Kamaru Usman, who was on this really long winning streak. And I'll give him that. Don't get me wrong. And anybody that's like, if we were to put the Mount Rushmore together of welterweights, Kamaru Usman has to be on that. Has to be. He is definitely number 2 as the greatest welterweight of all time. Number 1, GSP. Now, Kamaru Usman, the amount of fighters that he went toe-to-toe against, we got from anyone from the first Leon Edwards, Rafael dos Anjos, Damian Maia. We got ourselves the Kobe Covingtons, the Jorge Masvidals, the Gilbert Burns. He has a big lineup of fighters. Even Tyron Woodley. There is just such an amazing talent stacked division within the welterweights, and it's always been that way. When George St. Pierre ran it, when Tyron Woodley ran it, and when Kamaru Usman ran it. Now, Kamaru Usman, I would say, has definitely had some very much more impressive performances, but the list of George St. Pierre is just cannot be overlooked and cannot be touched. Because the amount of legends, we're talking legends. Now, I know some of the arguments that I've heard where Kamaru Usman's opponents would probably be able to beat George St. Pierre's opponents. Unfortunately, that's 2 different levels. Why I say that is because you also got to remember this. When George St. Pierre was coming up, back in the early 2000s and then the later 2000s, give or take, MMA wasn't, I would say, it was booming and it was popular, but nowhere near as popular as it is today. When he was coming up and when he started making his first title defenses and such, there wasn't very many jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, MMA gyms and throughout the cities that we all lived in. Now we go out literally almost every corner. You'll see a jiu-jitsu gym outside. You'll see a Muay Thai. You'll see a UFC. You'll see an MMA gym somewhere. Very easy to locate. But when George St. Pierre was coming up, it wasn't extremely out there just yet. Still popular on TV, but wasn't out there as far as training. And then we look at the opponents that George St. Pierre went against. Now, I made this argument before, because now with this argument that George St. Pierre and Kamaru Usman are going back and forth of whether or not who is the greatest of all time, Kamaru Usman just got knocked out. We all know that. We all seen it. Great knockout. And I call this as by far the biggest upset. The first biggest upset was George St. Pierre getting knocked out by Matt Serra. I say that you look back at that, George St. Pierre was coming off an impressive victory over Matt Hughes, that second fight. Matt Hughes, definitely a great opponent. But he head kicked him, knocked him out, and became the welterweight champion. Matt Serra, who was in the UFC prior to that, built up some records. He did go against guys like BJ Penn, Dean Thomas. He had some, notable victories and such. And he was on that Ultimate Fighter comeback and ended up winning and got a title shot against George St. Pierre. So the likelihood of him knocking out George St. Pierre wasn't up there. It was not out of the realm of possibility of Matt Serra beating this new, young, very talented fighter in George St. Pierre, but being knocked out, definitely very impressive. Would I call it the biggest upset in history? After, maybe at that time, sure, but after looking out and we see like the likes of Amanda Nunes and Julia Pena, that first fight. We seen Michael Bisping knocking out Luke Rockhold only 2 weeks in. Nate Diaz choking out Conor McGregor, their first fight. And now this one, Leon Edwards against Kamaru Usman. I would say that the biggest upset with that is Leon Edwards knocking out Kamaru Usman, because you got George St. Pierre was not pound for pound, and no one was regarding him as the greatest of all time at that moment just yet. Just yet. Of course, we know what happens in the future, but at that moment when he got knocked out by Matt Serra, definitely not the George St. Pierre that we're talking about now. With Kamaru Usman is labeled the greatest welterweight of all time by many, many people in the MMA community. And he was also the pound for pound number one. And on this crazy run of just knocking people out, great performances, just the top, the creme de la creme, Kamaru Usman was. And nobody on earth, I don't care who you are, would have ever had Leon Edwards knocking out Kamaru Usman from somebody who is not a knockout artist. I can't even tell you when's the last time Leon Edwards knocked somebody out. He is definitely not known for his power, not known for anything such as that in that category. So that's why it is definitely much more impressive that Leon Edwards knocking out Kamaru Usman. And that is why when I look back at both careers, I see George St. Pierre as the greatest of all time, because he learned from that knockout. Not saying Kamaru isn't going to learn, but we've seen him as he grew and made it, and he got better. And then when he revenged that loss against Matt Serra in their second fight, he completely dominated him. It wasn't one of those like, oh, I got you with a lucky shot. No, it was straight up taking you down, jabbing your face, kneeing you to the body, and stopping the fight, saying, you know what? Nope, can't continue because you're just going to get hurt. That's what George St. Pierre did to Matt Serra. Now, Kamaru Usman has that chance to do this against Leon Edwards. We got to see how it goes. We got to see if this knockout did phase him or didn't phase him. George St. Pierre, it didn't. And that's why I've always said in my greatest of all time video, it's important that some fighters do affect that loss. They do lose that championship, because then we get to see how hungry they are to get that back. Because George St. Pierre lost that championship and he was super hungry to get it back, and he got it back. He won the interim title fight, Matt Hughes Part 3. I believe he tapped him out with an armbar. Then he won the undisputed title with Matt Serra, kneed him to the body, and just from that point on went on this title run. I believe it was 10 title defenses. From the likes of BJ Penn, who's another Hall of Famer. You got, obviously we already said Matt Hughes, Josh Koscheck, John Fitch, Thiago Alves, Nick Diaz, Johnny Hendricks, who a lot of people feel like he lost, but still a very tough victory. Then moved up in weight and beat Michael Bisping and became the middleweight champion of the world. So yes, those are what I see as making George St. Pierre the greatest welterweight of all time. You look at his record, and in these victories, boring they were. Some of the fights were very technical, a very high technical chess match. Like something that we see that Israel Adesanya is going through right now. But he was still able to neutralize a lot of people's own game. We seen what he did. He was able to do with Jake Shields, who was a master grappler, and just pretty much out-jabbed his face, was able to take him down whenever need be. Same thing with Josh Koscheck, who is a high-level wrestler. Boom, was able to take him down and literally turned his face into mush. And then we seen Thiago Alves. He was able to grapple him, no problem. Pretty much throw him down at will. Then we seen who is a very high striker himself, and then also Dan Hardy, who is a very high striker himself. Pretty much everybody went in there with their game plan and wasn't able to do anything to George St. Pierre. It was almost very difficult to even win a round from George St. Pierre during his heyday. We know that Johnny Hendricks fight, very back and forth. You could have argued either way. Quite possibly George might have won, or he might have lost, but still a great fight. And it was also able to overcome a lot of adversity. We saw that head kick with Carlos Condit and pretty much knock George on his ass. But George was able to bounce back from it. He was able to hold on tight and come back just as strong. Kamaru Usman literally has all those good qualities to becoming the greatest welterweight of all time, especially now. Now we get to see what is he going to do when he comes back. Is he going to come back and face Leon Edwards and be that much more better? Is he going to allow this loss to affect him and not be the same Kamaru Usman that we're seeing? You know, and then is he going to go on another high title run? You know, because he still, you know, has 2 wins over Kobe Covington, 2 wins over Jorge Masvidal, you know, and then he got some young up-and-comers like Hamzat Chimaev. There's a few other people in the back of the list. Right now, there's not a lot of people in the welterweight division that he has not faced yet, but still, you know, this makes things a little bit more interesting. But yeah, guys, that's what I say. No matter what, right now, unfortunately, maybe later down the line, he may be able to take that title away, but right now, Georges St-Pierre is by far the greatest welterweight of all time. If you agree, if you disagree, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the notification button, and I'll see you guys in the next video.